Good afternoon and welcome to our first live broadcast of 2020. My name's Alice and I head up our marketing function at Cognism. The aim of this session is to keep it really interactive. So we'd ask that you guys submit questions throughout and we will take them as we go. We're going to be looking at the key lessons from last year and focusing on how we scaled sales, both in terms of outbound and closing. We want to make it really practical and share some resources with you that enabled us to make real change in our company and hopefully also in your business. So joined with me today, I've got John Illett, who's our sales director, and John looks after the closers at Cognism. And then we've got David Benson, who's also sales director at Cognism, and he looks after the opportunity generators. Welcome, guys.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, so just quickly, the agenda that we will run through, we're going to start with how do you fill the funnel first, and is it inbound versus outbound? How do you decide where to put your focus? How do you structure the team? What roles should you have, and how does that change as you scale? So hiring, how to know when you go internal versus external, and then some tips as well from whichever way you decide to go, how we've done that ourselves in 2019. Training. A big thing for us is getting people to value very quickly at Cognism. So we'll discuss with John and David how they both do that with their teams. Incentives and rewards. So I think this is really key in sales. And we're going to look at some of the tips and tricks that John and David use. And then technology evolution. So being a tech company ourselves, we implement a lot of technology into the sales process. And we'll discuss some of the ways in which that's evolved during the last year or so. And finally, we're going to leave you with some top tips. Cool, so moving on to filling the funnel. Kicking us off, I think I'll hand over to John.
Sure.
So how did you, when you got started with Cognism, decide where to put your focus, whether it should be inbound, outbound, and how did that shift change as you scaled?
Okay, so I think it's really important to look at the evolution of the business. So when we first started in 2017, we just had two sales executives. So the main focus there was just testing, so testing different personas, and this was very much focused on our outbound model. So I think it was probably midway 2018 is when we got our first marketing hire, and up until then it was purely outbound focus. We still had inbound traffic coming in, but we weren't proactively going out to the market to try and drive leads in for our inbound channel. So if we look at how we've kind of scaled since then, so 2017 is when we built up our data pool. So we had all our pre-existing customers. We didn't really have a specified persona as such in terms of a client that we knew was a great fit for us. So once we built up that data pool across all these different verticals, company sizes, industries, we're able to really segment and say, okay, these are the people that we double down on. So from an outbound perspective, we really found those key personas, really went after them, and then again when we got marketing individual, it was then their responsibility to again focus inbound traffic towards those personas. Going into 2019, obviously there has been a dynamic shift between our outbound and inbound, and our outbound team is really focused now on driving up efficiency gains because the headcount has kind of plateaued to an extent. And then inbound's obviously increasing, and that's where we're getting the kind of spike in revenue this year. So that dynamic shift has really taken place.
Great, thanks, John. David, is there anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I just think especially from an outbound perspective, John mentioned efficiency gains. It's really like using our outbound team to successfully target the right individuals. I think we'll talk a little bit on that later. Inbound, naturally, as a company grows, we're going to get more traction. We're bigger players in the market. We build a reputation, but it definitely takes time to build that reputation. And I think that's kind of the key. Earlier on, we used outbound. That was effectively our way of marketing, and then from there, it's really kind of the shift happens quite organically from there.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So where we've just started out as well in the US, it's very similar. We can't predict so much with marketing like what our target's going to be, whereas in the UK now we have very predictable targets. Like 50% of the revenue every month is from marketing, so that's the inbound. But I guess when you're actually trying for predictability and early on, you've got to
100%.
Yeah, and I think it is just building up that initial data pool to ensure you can have that predictable element before you hire 5 more people. You need to know what that is actually going to result in at the end. So it's really, really important to get that established first.
Absolutely.
So I think on that, like this slide shows, this is where we are now, which is like really very predictable. We built a model. This is just for the first 3 months of this quarter. But I guess, Dave, do you want to run us through this and how we use this model to set our targets and like how we've broken it down?
Yeah, so I think it all starts with our overall revenue target, so our MRR target for each month. We basically take that number and we factor backwards, or we move backwards from that point. So we look at the amount of opportunities that we need to create in order to generate enough of the deals. We do that based on historical factors. So we've got 2 years worth of data now. We know roughly for every opportunity we receive what the likelihood of that closing is. And then from there, we can work back again and we can say, okay, in order to create that many opportunities, we need a certain number of, in that case, SDRs or marketing spend to therefore generate it. And then, like in terms of the split itself, it's done financially as a business strategy. Again, we know what the spend of like our outbound team is on, all of their tech combined with just their salaries and commissions. And then from marketing, we have, their salaries plus the paid content, ads, SEO, like anything that goes into the events, anything that goes into those spends, and we can blend that together. I think as an overall business strategy, we obviously want to combine both factors. We see both as great ways of generating opportunities and therefore revenue for the business.
Yeah, and I think what's actually really interesting on this slide as well is that we've seen close rates differ depending on the channel, so that's factored into the model. So as you go, it depends on how much historical data you have to work on. But we look back last year on the H2 of last year, and then we base this model for this year on that. And it might change as we go. Like we might find actually marketing isn't closing at 30% anymore. It's, we've managed to increase it to 35%, or it could go down, and outbound might go up, but you've got to always be looking at that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think really quick as well, just from a forecasting standpoint, it's really important to take into different factors, like the metrics. So if we're looking at, for example, our partnership channel, which was established late 2019, the average sales cycle on that is 18 days. And if we're looking at it from an inbound perspective, it's 80 days. So when it comes to a dip in performance in a particular month, look at those channels where you've got a really short sales cycle and really double down on that. And I think that for us, where we had that gap, that was really essential just to fill the void of any revenue that we had.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, cool. So I guess feeding into this is how do we target? And I think as you scale, that evolves as well. So John, could you talk us through this model that we've got in front of us and how we go about deciding where we're going to target and fitting that across inbound?
Sure, absolutely. So there's quite a lot to digest here. So let me break it down from the green, amber, and red. So these are basically all the key or all the industries that we targeted throughout 2017 to today. And basically what we've done, we segmented it based on good fit customers, which fit in green, and then medium ones, which we're happy to take on. And then we have red, which are customers that we do not touch. So I think the evolution of this came out late 2019. So prior to that, we were really just focused on the ease of acquisition. So anyone we could bring into as a customer, that was really our primary focus as a sales function. As we've evolved, obviously, the main thing we're looking at is the lifetime value of the customer. So renewed customers per company size and renewed customers per industry, that played a really essential role in terms of our outbound strategy for this year, primarily because if they're not renewing, there's no point really bringing them into the funnel initially. And from outbound, you've really got control over who you target. So if we look at amber, for example, event services, that was probably one of our key focuses last year. But what we identified was, despite how easy they were to win, we weren't getting the same renewal rate as we were, for example, at computer software. So it really is important to look deep into the data, because on face value, if we were just looking at it from a sales perspective in terms of that initial contract that we brought in, event services would be a great customer for us. But in the overall trajectory and overall timeline, it just doesn't fit in terms of our revenue model. Again, when it comes back to inbound versus outbound, there is going to be a discrepancy here as well. what we tend to do is if we get a bad fit customer that's in our red zone that comes in through an inbound channel, it's at the decision of individuals or managers to decide whether we actually want to sign them as a client. And I think that is because they're much further along the funnel. They really actively want this software and they're proactively going to the market to find it. So it's very different from an outbound sell.
Yeah, those inbound leads actually become effectively self-qualifying a lot of the times. And for every inbound lead that comes in, we also have MDRs who pick up the phone, speak to them, and spend that time doing that discovery step before we take them to a demonstration stage as well. So yeah, we do take a lot of time, but we're way more open in terms of the people that we bring in. And for outbound, exactly as John said, we can be so much more targeted. So that's what we do.
Yeah, I think as well, like you need to have enough data to really segment and create this graph initially. So you need to have at least 10 customers in every single sector. So it really depends how you segment this out, whether you segment it out by revenue, industry or company size, but you need to have a big enough pool of data to be able to draw a red, amber and green customer base. And that's why 2017, 2018, it really was just building up our client base across all these different sectors to identify what really is working and where we get the best traction.
And on that, I'd say like this is something we'll review every quarter as well. It's not just like stagnant.
Yeah.
It will change as we look at it, and we might even refine it like more than that. And obviously, as you go into new markets, then you have to start again, and you can't assume that it will be the same.
It's worth mentioning, and finally, like we're still exploring new markets. As a business, we're very lucky in terms of our product that we can actually basically work with any company that does any form of B2B sales. So for example, at the moment we're looking at universities because we've got a university that's a great customer for us at the moment, but it's never been part of our strategy. So we're still at a stage where we are exploring, but it's a lot more controlled.
And often those explorations happen through blow-ins from inbound, and then that's where you find actually that's something to worth doubling down.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, I think moving on. So team structure and roles. This obviously changes as you scale and you mature as a company. So I think, Dave, do you want to start us out with how this for us looks and how it's kind of scaled as we've grown, and any key points that's worth pointing out?
Yeah, I think so. Similarly to the way that we did targeting, the structure has developed over time. We have a hard and fast rule that is we tie into our culture that every single person that has been in the sales team has done the SDR function. Myself and John came as SDRs initially and kind of moved through, and so that's something that really helps our culture. So historically, kind of 2018, start 2019, everybody was in the SDR team was concentrated and targeted on outbound. We were receiving inbound leads. They were spread across the team to be actioned, and we gave them a small kind of bonus, but it was never actually part of their target. But as the marketing function really grew, we identified the fact that we needed to separate out the inbound leads and the way they were actioned. That was kind of for a couple of reasons. Number one, it became, because it was always a bonus for our SDRs as opposed to what they were targeted on, it kind of took a back seat. And truthfully, and what we know now is that anybody that comes in inbound for us or through marketing is much more valuable as an individual opportunity. The close rate is significantly higher. So we really wanted to concentrate on all of those leads that were coming in through marketing and how we can increase the amount of them that are getting into the like demo stage for us, and then also therefore opportunity and closing for us. So we split out and we made two of the team at this stage solely focus on all inbound leads. So that's direct inbound plus all of our downloadable content leads that come out. We prioritize them going to events. And in terms of their structure, which we'll get onto, but their targets are based on the amount of opportunities they created, but also their response times to inbounds, the way that they're responding to inbounds, and also their conversion rates on those as well. So that's how we built it. Recently, we've iterated again because we did have an application process for moving into the MDR role, and we kind of sat it under marketing. But what we realized is people were moving in there when they were kind of becoming a bit apathetic towards the SDR role. And again, we just saw the value of having great people in that role. So we've now set it up so that we have SDRs, we have senior SDRs, and then finally move into the MDR function. And that feeds straight into the BDM team from there as the natural next progression. Management roles for us that we don't have is a little bit more ad hoc. People don't necessarily move into that space. Like I suppose as clearly there's no identified route, but if any of our managers have more than 9 reports, that gives us the opportunity to create those roles. So in the SDR team, obviously we have myself as an inside sales, as the sales director who looks after the majority of the team. We also have my colleague Catherine, who's absolutely fantastic, and she 5 of the SDR team report directly to her as well. So just to make sure that everybody's getting the contact time they need. Also, as you can see on the screen, is kind of the CS function. I think a lot of companies do make customer success managers or account managers a part of the kind of new business team. We've chosen to completely split it out here because one thing that we really see is the role of an SDR and account executives is very, very, very different from a customer success manager or account manager, in the sense that our SDRs and closers are complete hunters, right? That's what we're looking for. We're looking for people that are looking for new business, constantly finding it, whereas our customer success managers are all about rapport building and relationship building and support, and hence kind of we look for a more for what's described as farmers.
Cool, thanks, David. I'm just going to quickly interject. We've got some questions, and I think one of them is like actually really important that we answer it quickly. I think you always forget that we use lingo and like analogies, and actually we haven't like explained it. So, what exactly is an SDR? Dave, do you want to?
Yeah, of course. So our SDRs is a sales development representative. It's the first role. They are solely focused on bringing opportunities into the business from cold. Outbound. So they are cold calling all day, they're cold emailing, they're cold, they're reaching out to people on LinkedIn, they're proactively themselves going to networking events, and their job and their sole job is to try and book people in for demonstrations of the software with our account executive or business development management team, who then take on the prospect from there. And that's kind of where John sits.
Yeah, that's great. And I think one thing to differentiate or just to establish as well is the differentiation between an SDR and an MDR. So SDR is all outbound focused. So we are providing a list of data to them. They proactively go out and introduce our services to them. And MDR is responsible for any content that we publish. People might proactively or input their contact details. They're responsible for generating pipeline through that funnel, through that instance. And also any inbound traffic through web forms that we put onto the website as well.
Yeah, so essentially marketing development reps, anything that's brought in through marketing, any form of interest, hand raise, that is what the MDRs focus on. Okay, so back to the structure. John, do you want to talk through how it works from the closing point?
Yeah, sure. So the account executive role is responsible for conducting either face-to-face meetings or online web demonstrations. So we have different tiers within the BDM team, or account executive team. So firstly, we have an individual that's going through a ramp phase. So a ramp phase is the first 3 months of them going into that position. During that time, we have an incremental increase in their quota. So it starts at 0 MRR per month, which is monthly recurring revenue, and gradually increases to 4.5K at the end of the 3rd month. The reason why we do this is because our sales cycle typically stands at around 100 days. So we need to ensure that they have the time to actually establish and generate that revenue. Following on from there, we then have our junior A's. How we differentiate between the opportunities they get is through round robin. So we have different weightings for different BDMs. So our junior BDMs solely focused on outbound 1 to 50 employees. And the reason behind that is because we don't want junior reps going after high contract values. We want the big opportunities to go with people that have the highest conversion rates. So then we move into the mid-tier. That stands at around 5.5 MRR per month. So it's a little increase from a junior. But the reason why we do that is because we don't want to put someone straight from 4K MRR to a 7K MRR and not have that consistent billing.
Also, just to interject, just so you know, our average deal size is probably 1K in MRR. So
Yeah,
we're talking about 4 and a bit deals or 5 and a bit
deals. So it's practically increasing by around 30% if you're putting them up to our senior BDM. So we do have that middle tier. It's not a change in title. It has a little incremental change in their base salary, but the reason is because we want to ensure consistency. So when they do bump up, we know they'll constantly hit 7K per month. And again, the main difference is they're getting the larger opportunities, they're getting a lot more inbound registrations, and they're also getting larger company sizes. So over time, you could look at it in the sense that the longer they're in the role and the more expertise they're getting, the higher the close rate will be and the better opportunities they're getting put into their funnel.
I think one thing I want to add on all of this, because a question that myself and John get quite a lot is, what's the point in kind of putting having SDRs and then senior SDRs and all of these different levels. And one thing that really happens, we're going to get onto hiring later, but we hire pretty much and exclusively graduates and millennials. And we find that they're constantly wanting more responsibility, and especially that they want to jump on LinkedIn, they want to kind of tell people about a promotion and they want a change in job title because they're very, very ambitious. So I think by doing this, it's confirmation from us to them that they're doing an absolutely fantastic job. And then combined with that, we ensure that every time that they move up, the role doesn't change a huge amount, but we're definitely adding more and more responsibilities as we move through, which I think has a really positive impact on us.
Yeah.
Great. We've had quite a few questions, so I'm just going to jump into the questions quickly before we move on. So I think this one's to David. When is the best time to hire an MDR?
Yeah, so there's no hard and fast rule on that, but the way that we looked at it was kind of very simple, that we had so much inbound traffic coming in that we had enough to fill a full-time role. And as soon as that moment happened, that's where we wanted to take someone out of the team to solely specialize in actioning the marketing leads for us.
Yeah, I think you've got to get to a point of predictability. So with your marketing, that now we can say that we will generate X number of content leads per month. So actually it's about 800 a month. And then we also target 35 direct inbounds every week. So we can model that out, and we can know how many calls that would mean that an MDR would be making and how they would hit, when they would hit capacity. So that's when we'd actually need another one, or if there's actually a role there at all. So you need to model backwards, and you need to have met predictability in the marketing engine as well.
The last thing you want is a kind of slower week for marketing where you've got an MDR that's twiddling their thumbs. So yeah, I think that's a good message about predictability.
So another question, I think probably to Dave. Oh, actually, I'm John. You probably able to take this. When you've hired an SDR, should you hire them when starting up a sales team or after the account execs are up and running? Maybe John take that.
Okay, so I think it depends on the structure of what your AEs are doing. If your AEs are revenue generating obviously, but if they're generating their own pipeline as well, then it's a very, very different instance. So at Cognism, the AEs are solely focused on closing. They don't generate any of their own pipeline. All of that comes from the SDR team. So in theory, based on the question, you would need to have an SDR feeding the pipeline. The AE wouldn't exist otherwise. So the way we structured it when we first started was we had Nazma, our CRO. She was the AE at the time, and then she had 2 SDRs sitting below her, which was myself and Hector. So that's initially how we started. We didn't have a marketing department at that point. And in terms of the first hire, I think Nazma was actually the first hire in the company aside from the CEO at the time. So yeah, I think in terms of whether you should hire an SDR, I think it's probably the most essential role to have.
I think the reason we've done it is because it really brings that focus. Like SDRs are purely focused on generating opportunities. AEs are purely focused on closing. I think what I might have seen from other businesses, and I'm sure John will back me up on this, is sometimes when people are in 360 roles, they have things that they prefer and things they don't, and generally the things that they don't like is picking up the phone and creating opportunities, even if it is for themselves. So having these individuals who are solely focused on that makes a huge, huge difference.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is a really good point. I think we've covered all of these questions, but just one thing I was going to touch on, and Dave, you slightly spoke about it, but you've got to balance progression with efficiency. So if you, especially Cognizant being a VC-backed company, we answer to our investors at the end of the day, and some of the metrics that we're measured against are also like burn and how efficient our sales team is. So I think there's a balance you have to strike between giving people opportunities in the team and, like you said, feeding that need for progression, but then also remaining efficient. So do you want to touch on that and how you like approached it?
Yeah, I think we very carefully planned out when we're going to hire into, for example, the account executive role, when we need more BDMs, and therefore, because we know that the SDRs are feeding that, we know roughly the timelines for when we're going to need to promote. So with that in mind, I think, you know, we just look at that, we become conservative about it, and then it's our job as managers to also set expectations for kind of how quickly individuals can move through the team. Historically, people were actually moving in our company just because of our growth from SDRs to BDMs in around 6 months. I think this year for us, we're going to have more of a focus on not necessarily scaling the headcount as much, but while still scaling the revenue quite aggressively, and we're going to concentrate on efficiency gains. So I've actually got 4 new starters today, and my message to them in terms of the expectations for how long it would take them to get into the BDM role is definitely different from the expectations that I was setting last year, simply because I now know that it's going to take them longer realistically to get into the BDM role, and in tying that into their targets as well. So, you know, we've for this latest group, we've slightly changed their targets in terms of how they can be promoted, to reflect the fact that we know it's going to take a longer time.
Great.
I think if I can just chip in really quickly, just one thing that I found really important was the ratio of SDR to AE. I think when we initially started, we had 2 to 1. Obviously, this varies company to company, but over time, we've gradually been decreasing that as our marketing channels been bringing in considerable more weight to the pipeline. So by the end of this year, we're looking to potentially get to 1 to 1. So I would always advise, when you're in that early stage, have more SDRs to AEs, and then when you get the efficiency gains, then look to bring that back to a more moderate level.
Great. Okay, so moving on to hiring. So I think a question a lot of people ask is internal versus external. We've alluded to some of the ways in which we approach it ourselves. But kicking off with John, like, how do you know whether to go internal or external for a role?
Okay, so I really think it comes down to the seniority of the position. So I think you always need to have a benchmark to assess against externally. So any position that's above a kind of entry level role, always open it up externally. And what you'll be able to gauge from that is whether you've got the right candidates internal, as opposed to the external candidates that you're interviewing. It will also reaffirm that you're making the right decision if you are promoting internally. And following on from that as well, we'll be able to identify any missing gaps. So there might be a requirement that didn't even come up when you were creating the job spec that you've been able to identify from interviewing an external candidate. So it's really, really important to kind of have a benchmark to assess. If there's the option between promoting externally or internally, I believe you should always promote internally, because it shows a clear progression path for everyone that you've got within your team. And especially if it's quite an incremental step, like a big step up, it really does give confidence to the rest of the team that they can aspire and get to that level as well.
Yeah, great. So Dave, I know you're always hiring. Well, you're a very active hiring manager anyway. So I think a key piece, and that's quite interesting to touch on, is how to work with agencies and recruiters. Can you give some advice based on your experience?
Yeah, I think Cognizant, our strategy has always been that we want to hire the best quality candidate physically possible. We're willing to spend in order to do that, and so that's kind of why we've looked towards agencies. We do tend to go for the graduate market, which is an interesting market in the sense that they become very moldable. We can generally grab talent when, like, very early, when they can be, I suppose, purely based on potential as opposed to actual kind of like ability. But in doing so, the risk, I think, tends to be slightly higher, because a lot of them have never done sales before. They may have come out of university with the attitude of I want a job which changes every day, I want to make loads of money, and I want progression, which pretty much everybody believes, and therefore they're directed into sales. And we really want to concentrate on those that are genuinely looking for a complete sales career, and that's what we do. So I think in terms of my advice, if you are using agencies, be really, really honest with them. Like, don't be afraid to kind of tell them when a candidate is not the right fit for yours at all. In 2019, we hired 19 SDRs, and I must have signed terms with about 25 to try and work out what companies were going to offer me, the best candidates. So I wasn't afraid to do that. Obviously, as we all know, it's very easy to sign terms. So I got them to send them over, and if the candidates weren't of a good enough quality after the first few, I would maybe cut them, but I'd make the decisions like hard and fast. What we found now is, and to I suppose name drop some of our better recruiters, we work with companies like Venetrix, This is Prime, and Graduate Fast Track. All of those recruiters actually meet their candidates face to face, and I think that's made a real difference, concentrating on those agencies, despite them usually costing a little bit more.
Give a grad a go as well.
Give a grad a go, yeah.
I'd say one thing to consider as well is actually get your recruiters to come in-house and meet the pre-existing people that you got within the team, because that'll give them a really good gauge in terms of the culture and what you're fundamentally looking for in your hires. So if they're not willing to do that, it's probably worth a pass, because it's really important you have a good relationship with them and they know exactly what kind of talent you're looking for. And the only best way to do that is when you actually meet them face to face.
It's obviously only opinion as well, but we get invited to a lot of assessment days, and kind of through practice last year, we found it really, really difficult to go to assessment days and hire. And I think the reason for that is because we were constantly comparing them to the environment that we usually interview in, which was in office, kind of one-to-one. So instead of comparing them to the other people that we'd hired previously, we were actually just looking at comparing each one to those at the assessment day. And so we didn't have much success at all. So we try and keep a very standardized process for every single person that we hire, so that we're taking out as many variables as physically possible.
I think we're going to come on to that process in a second, but just a quick question that's come in, I think that's relevant to now, is when do you know when an SDR is ready to move into a BDM role? So because we've said that we only promote internally for that, so I guess John.
Yeah, sure. I think it really comes down to like having a rigid plan for the year in terms of your hiring. If you have the ability to identify that you've got 3 open spaces by the end of the quarter, you can really start prepping your reps or your SDRs from when that gets announced. So they're not necessarily always going to be ready. I think it's really hard to say, okay, this person's 100% ready. Like, you need to give them at least a 2 to 3 month training. What we do internally, let me start with what we start doing internally. So we have a mentorship scheme. So every single SDR is partnered with an AE. This starts as soon as they hit that senior title. So there might not be an open position for an AE role, but at that point they're getting trained in the skills that you'll need to become an AE. What it does then, it gives us a talent pool of people that are like 80% ready. And then when we do have an open opportunity, we can then pump them straight into the AE role. So it reduces that ramp time. But the main benefit there, of course, is we don't actively put out job posting and then they're getting skills, getting trained at that point. They're trained prior to that. But the skills we're looking for fundamentally is being able to conduct an online demo. That's probably the most important one. So we run numerous instances with myself and Dave where we pretend to be some of our ideal customer personas, and then we're judging them based on like a metric scoring. So their ability to do a discovery, their ability to articulate back to pain points, their ability to introduce themselves, build rapport. All of these have a measurable score, and then we can identify shortfalls in terms of where they need additional training.
I think what's really important is actually it's not about them being ready. You need to put the onus back on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So it's for us, because that's our policy, to train them to the point where they're ready. And if we haven't, then that's actually a problem of management.
Mm-hmm.
The talent.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I think we've talked about a little bit of the interview structure for the BDM. Do you want to talk through how you interview for SDRs, especially as you're saying you're going to grad?
Yeah, I think so. First things first, the agencies do me a huge favour in that they obviously interview them beforehand, and because of the relationships that we've now built, they're very good at sending ones that they believe are a great fit. So that certainly can shorten our interview process. We then do an initial first one, that's with either Catherine or myself, who run the SDR team specifically. The key there is we want to focus on why they want to do sales, and we want them to be, very focused on that. So, and with that as well, we want them to be hunters. We talked about hunters and farmers earlier. We're trying to identify who wants a job where they're, just talking to prospects a lot and building relationships, and who are physically trying to make as much money as physically possible. So we ask a lot of questions around that. We want them to know product, basic product knowledge. Have they done their background research? And if there's anything on their CV that we might be potentially alarmed by, then we want obviously to talk through those and those elements of it and get responses. We then move people into a second round interview, and that's our final stage. That is a presentation that they do for us, 15 minutes, on why me, why sales, why Cognism. And that really shows us what type of salesperson they're going to be. Ultimately, we hope that they're going to move into a closing role for us, where they're going to be doing demonstrations or presentations of our product to others. So it really gives us great insight into that. And then we sit down with them for another half an hour. And this is with myself, Nazma, and Catherine usually, and potentially even John. And we basically just kind of any other further questions we run through.
And you all have to agree, don't you?
Yeah, 100%. If we're happy with them then and there, we'll just offer them the job. We don't kind of mess around. Once we found the right quality, we move on them. But I think
there's a quick question to repeat the name of the recruitment agencies that you use.
Yeah, so Venetrix, This Is Prime, Graduate Fast Track, and then Give a Grad a Go.
Cool.
There's probably other recruiters wanting to get intel. I'm going to get loads of pitching. We are hiring at the moment, though, so if you want to, hit me up.
Great, thanks. Okay, I put down as well interviewing for a sales manager. I guess that's slightly different, and we haven't really touched on that too much.
Yeah, I think it's, especially from an AE perspective, it's just giving more responsibility to your senior members of the team. So giving them 2 mentors, for example. If you're doing that, you're kind of giving them the skills prior to them actually getting that role. So you're kind of testing them, identifying whether they're spending the right time with them, if they're actually developing their mentees. If they're not, and they're a great salesperson, try and keep them within the sales role. Like, don't give them that linear path in terms of managers, the next step up. You will make way more money if you're a salesperson as opposed to a manager generally. So if your salespeople are very, very good, don't necessarily push them down into a manager route. So we always do that. We give them multiple mentees. We give them the training while they're in the senior BDM role, so that if an opportunity does arise, they are equipped and they're ready to go. And you'll have a really good framework in terms of whether they actually have the competency and the skills to do that.
Okay, moving on. So I think this is a really important point for us, because we're a high growth company. We have to get our employees to value really, really quickly, especially in our sales team, and even like faster in the SDR role. So very good to be asked this question of you today, Dave, because we've just hired 4 new starters. Yes. So what's your plan to get them up to speed in as little time possible?
Yeah, so it starts with the recruitment process. I think one thing I probably didn't touch on, but I definitely should. Whenever I do that first round interview, I will always give them things to work on, and then during the second round interview, I'm looking to see if they've actually worked on that, and that really shows me like their moldability. Are they able to take on feedback quickly and apply them? And so that definitely helps in terms of bringing the kinds of individuals that will ramp very quickly. In terms of our structure, as I said, we've got 4 people, newbies starting today. The first, we spend 1 day kind of going through the products, what the company looks like, the values and the goals of the company as a whole. The key for me, especially with the SDR role, we're kind of fortunate that our product's quite easy to explain generally, and I really, really don't want to overcomplicate it, especially for the SDR team. They're generally having 5-minute conversations with people about our product and then booking them in for a demonstration. And so, they almost don't need to know too much in order to get them involved. Day 2 is we go through the full tech stack. So we have to go through kind of our CRM, our outreach tools, anything that's involved. That actually takes quite a long time. And then the second half of day 2 is role playing, talking about sales techniques, basic sales techniques, and then day 3 they're on the phone. My big aim is to get them to book a demonstration of the software by the end of their first week.
That's happened every time.
That's happened every time, yeah. So last year, 19 hires, all of them did it. And I think that straight away just builds so much confidence that if you can do it week 1, then you can, you're already contributing, it just puts them on the right foot. And then from there, I suppose as well, it's about building the ecosystem around them to continue to develop that training. So John's obviously mentioned the mentor-mentee scheme, so that's implemented from week 1. They sit with their mentors for an hour a week at least. We've obviously got managers who are constantly helping them, sitting behind them. All of our managers solely focus on management and not they're not targeted on individual revenues or opportunities. And then we have weekly training sprints that are very structured and weekly call reviews. So we just really allow all of the reps to have that time to gain that support. But yeah, learning on the job, throwing them in the deep end really works.
Cool. And then I guess, John, how does that vary as a BDM? What's the getting them to value quickly? What's your plan?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I think it comes back to having a capacity model in place for at least the next quarter, so when you're promoting people into that role. So as an example, we've got 2 open spaces that we need to fill within the next month. These were pre-known probably about 2.5 months ago. So during that time frame, I've had the ability to run group sessions with candidates that want to run, create kind of a safe space and get them to actually start practicing demonstrations amongst each other. So in theory, they're kind of doing the legwork already prior to even getting into the role. The benefit of that obviously is they're not burning leads. So when they automatically become an AE, they're not training as such, they're kind of ready to go. And the best example of this is we just promoted someone this week called Safe. And he was in that kind of training program within the last 2 months. And the benefit there is he'd done a demonstration on his first day and got a contract out. That's pretty unheard of. And I think the reason behind that is because the training was pre-done before he actually went into the role and he was ready to go. So how do you reduce the time to ramp? Start training them from day 1. As soon as they are eligible to get promotion, you don't know when the headcount's going to increase. So make sure you have got a pool of talent there.
And I think really interestingly on that, the ambition of all of, I suppose, across the team, but especially in the SDR function, someone like Safe was actually willing to do that training outside of working hours. Mm-hmm. So 9 till 5:30, they were still completely concentrated. He never took a hit on his SDR targets because he was doing that sort of thing at lunchtime or after work, just so he was ready for once the interview process started.
Well, also on that, I think that's a really important point. We make sure that they have to have hit their target to be eligible as well.
Yes.
So they can never lose focus. That target comes first.
Yes.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Anything else? Sorry.
Yeah, I can just one thing as well to touch on is just I know one of the questions came up around a tech stack. So you need to have the software in place to be able to train your reps and identify areas of weakness. And one of the key ones for my team is using something like Gong or Chorus. So when they go into that role, having the ability to review their demonstrations, give them feedback in real time if needed. If you don't have the visibility and you're not recording them calls, it's going to be really difficult to give them areas of improvement. So I would say, especially during that ramp period, spend a lot of time reviewing the calls, having a benchmark and having group discussions where you go through the newbies call collectively across the team and give them pointers. That will really increase or decrease the amount of time it will take to ramp them.
Okay, so I think also one really important point about training and getting people to value quickly is you get what you measure. So at Cognizant, we're massive believers in measuring everything but meaningful metrics, things that will really make a difference, both to the SDRs and their role and also then the BDMs. So this is an example of a SDR dashboard. So Dave, do you want to talk through the things that you measure weekly with the SDRs and how that helps?
Yeah, so I think before we start that, I think the main message that we always have for our SDRs is it's the output. It's not necessarily the input. That's what we're really recording. As long as they're hitting targets, I don't really mind what activity. Whereas I think a lot of companies become so focused on every SDR needs to hit 75 calls a day every single day, that the reps are actually doing that for the sake of doing it. So, just to preface what I'm about to say, but otherwise, we are still recording those factors. So we're looking at, yes, the amount of calls they're doing every single day. We're looking at the amount of emails they're sending every single day. We're looking at the amount of new LinkedIn connections that they have. We're looking at their call time. Are they making calls? Yes, they're making calls, but are they having valuable conversations at the end of it? How many meetings they're booking per week? And then from those meetings booked, how many meetings are actually attended? So what is that conversion rate? And then it's identifying, I suppose from a training aspect, it's identifying what the gap is in terms of, are they below the average, are they above the average? If they're above the average, should we be training what they do to other reps? And then if they're below the average, how do we fix that problem?
And also finding out where the issues might lie, because you might be making lots of calls, but actually still not booking in the meeting. So
exactly,
then that's an indication to listen to calls.
100%. Looking at the screen right now, we've got the bit that's tasks to do now. For this rep, he's got 6 tasks that are overdue. Are we seeing that lots and lots of tasks are overdue? Therefore, is admin that their organisation, is their admin the weakness for them that's actually affecting their results? So we can look further. We can look further afield.
I think
to identify problems.
It's amazing. It's really important to say this is not about us dictating to them. It's actually about identifying areas of improvement.
100%.
So I'm going to move on to the BDM dashboard. So for you, John, how does this look, and what are you measuring and why?
Yeah, sure. So this is what every single A is given as soon as they step into the role. So what it's doing is looking at the metrics for me that matter, like what stuff am I looking at to ensure that they're staying on top of their pipeline. So we got commit reports. So how many deals they committed this month? It gives them, it's literally the first thing they see. And if that's 0, that really, for me, I need to go spend some time with them to identify where that shortfall is. We got progress bars. These are the demonstrations that they've held, just fundamentally just closing them off. Because if they're not closing them, they're not creating the opportunity, and it's just not going to move down the funnel. We've then got no next step. So if there's no next step established with any of the opportunities, that's brought to their awareness. And then next step in the past, if their next step is passed, that means for me, I probably shouldn't give them any more opportunities, turn them off the queues, because they've probably got too much in their pipeline if they're not managing their existing opportunities. Other ones that we've got, so ops over 100 days. I really like this one because what it does, it identifies any opportunities that go in past our average sales cycle. So anything that goes past that line, there's questions there whether they should actually be continuing to work them. If they pass that line, it's probably not beneficial for them to do that, and they should be focusing on the ones that are likely to close. And the final one at the bottom is the priority level. So after a certain amount of time in a sales role, you will be able to identify what opportunities are likely to close based on gut as well, as opposed to where they are in terms of the pipeline, so 25%, 50%, etc. So I get all the reps to put, as soon as they do a demonstration, how the demo went. So if it went really, really well and there's a really high chance of closing, put them as a high. And eventually over time, what we tend to see is that around 95% of our deals come from the high and medium, and very low proportion actually come from the low. So it just allows them to prioritize their time and focus on the ops that are likely to close.
Great, thanks. I think this is just a quick table of what the metrics that we track from an input and output perspective. We've spoken about these targets already, so I won't spend any more time on that. And again, this is a screenshot from one of the pieces of software that we use, which is
yeah, do you want me to just touch on it? So this is Cluster, and I think as a business, we're so metrics driven, and this really does give us a holistic view of any kind of metric that we want. So we don't need to delve in and look at Salesforce. Like, this just gives us like snapshots of everything. So it's really, really important. And it all kind of, for one that's great for me is like the demo attended to op 1 rate. If that drops drastically within a 3-month cycle or 1-month cycle, I can step in straight away. So if you're not evaluating this stuff, it's going to get to the point where it's actually affecting your revenue numbers. So constantly track these and use a software like Cluster. I think it's been great for us.
We are going to come on to our tech stack in a little bit. So for those asking us to go through it, we are going to talk you through the whole stack in a second. Okay, I think this is the end from Cluster, isn't it?
Yes, this is Gong. So basically what Gong can do, one great resources, it's competitor. So you can put trackers for competitor names, and then you can identify every single time you go up against competitors. Again, it can identify where you've got shortfalls against certain ones, and from a marketing perspective, you can then create collateral to help win those deals.
And I think also what's really nice about this is the talk ratio. There's a lot of research out there about how much you should be talking and how much the person on the other line should be talking to and how that affects your sales. So I guess that's a really key.
Yeah, again, like interactivity as well, like how much is that conversation ping-ponging back and forth, so it's not just a one-way conversation. They're asking proactive questions, and Gong gives you kind of that overall analysis without having to delve into every single call.
Great. Okay, so managing underperformance, I think it's probably important that we touch on it. Sales is, you know, at the end of the day, it's really easy to measure whether someone's performing and hitting their targets, and sometimes it happens that people don't. And then what do you do about that, and how can you get them to start performing?
Yeah, I think here we act pretty fastly on performance. We have monthly targets across the team, so if anybody misses their target 2 months in a row, they get put on a personal development plan. If someone misses by more than 50%, then we also put them straight onto a personal development plan. That personal development plan is really there to say, look, we recognise that you're underperforming, and we want to give you that extra attention and everything that you need to make sure that you get back on track. So they're not getting in any kind of you know, we know that sales is such a momentum sport that yeah, like, we just want to get them back on track as quickly as possible. So personal development plans, the way that they look for us is, I mean, for the SDR team, I can speak on, we start very closely measuring their activity and actually making sure that they're making enough calls every day, getting enough emails, just getting enough touch points every single day. We look at things like tasks, like I mentioned earlier. Are they if they've got any more than a certain amount of tasks open at any one time or kind of overdue, then that's part of the personal development plan. We look at soft skills as well, like how they're interacting with each other, how they're holding themselves across the when they come into work every single day, because that can be, you know, a lot of it. Sometimes you've got yourself into a bit of a rut, and you just need a bit of a, you know, you start standing up taller, smiling more, and kind of that'll naturally breed some success as well. So yeah, as it kind of says on the screen for you all, like you know, we're planning each day very, very clearly. We have daily targets for every single person, and kind of really break it down for them. Regular check-ins. We do one-to-ones with everybody in the team every single week anyway, but we up that to 3 for the whole week. So for at least half an hour, just to make sure that we're sitting down with them and spending time. That could be doing a call review, that could be doing some product training, or it could just be having a catch-up and just making sure that their headspace is in the right place.
I think it's really important to sort of touch on the fact that a week is a long time in a sales role or in a scale up. So it's really important that actually no one's left without help in even like a week.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well, one thing to that's really, really important is the time frame when they underperform. If it's been a rep that's been in the company for 6 months and they start underperforming, it's not as if their ability is reduced. It's probably down to an external factor. So you need to have the relationship with your team to actually identify what it is. It might be that they're overwhelmed in opportunities. It might be something personal. The most likelihood scenario is it's not something that you can't change. So it's not usually a training instance unless it's someone new that's gone into the role. It's either someone's massively overwhelmed, they got a personal issue, and it's our responsibility then to actually step in and make sure that they've got the resources at hand to go back to that level of performance. So that's what I look at in underperformance, because unless it's someone who's new, who's joined the role, they don't have the skills, then it's our job to step in.
Great. I think moving on to quick, because I'm conscious of time. So incentives and rewards. I think it's always a question we get asked a lot, is how do we compensate our sales team, and how do you keep them motivated? What incentives are you running? So Dave, first of all, I know you, well, actually let's touch on the compensation first, then we'll go into incentives second. So
okay.
On the screen right now, this is our model for the marketing development reps. This is how we compensate them. It looks really complicated. Dave will talk through it, but the main thing to focus on is that you want to compensate them in the actions that you the outputs that you want
yeah,
to
the behaviours that you want to drive.
Yeah.
So yeah, for our MDRs, we want them to book opportunities. At the top, you can see they are targeted on 18 SQOs added into the pipeline. SQOs is sales qualified opportunities. We work off of the BANT criteria. So that's that people have the budget for our software, they have the authority for our software, the need for our software, and it's the right time for them to buy. So, which helps generate the right quality of demos. It's not wasting the AE's time. So yeah, we're looking for 18 of those, but also every single marketing lead that comes in has a cost associated. So we need to look at conversion rate as well. It's all well and good just throwing them more and more marketing leads, but if they're burning for a lot of marketing leads to get to that output that we need, it's obviously not great. And then inbound response time, we're really, really big on how quickly we respond to inbound. We're very proud of that. We actually have people working on Saturdays and Sundays, and I've picked up inbounds at 11:30 in the evening. So yeah, that's really important to us. So again, the MDRs have a bonus for how quickly they're acting on those. And then if they can improve those conversions, we want to reward them for that. I think the key is make sure that when you're compensating people, it's about what they're doing and not, we don't really believe in kind of looking at team compensation plans.
Nothing out of their control.
Exactly, yeah. Everything in their control. And then, like second to that, I think just all of our sales teams have completely uncapped commissions. We want to be driving the behaviour that will make them kind of try and perform at way above their targets that we're setting for them as well.
Cool. So I want to pass over to John to talk about compensating BDMs and how that might look.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So the way that we do it, we vary it based on. So one thing that we do, if we look at contract length, we give a different proportion of that deal to them. So a 6-month contract varies to a 12-month contract, and the benefit of that is because we want to drive behavior that gets us more committed revenue. I don't really want to disclose exactly what it is, but the benefit there, and that's one way that we do it. The other way is to run accelerators. So when someone hits a certain percentage over their target, we then give them like an extra 2% bump in terms of the money that they'll get from that deal. On a short-term basis, it's really important as well to run sprints. So we run sprints. So if we're under revenue in one particular week, we might run a incentive, whoever can hit 5K MRR prior to that week ending. And the benefit there is you're just getting really short bursts of a boost when there's a decline in revenue. So again, use them on an ad hoc basis. Don't use them constantly. But put them in place when there is a decline and you're not necessarily going to hit your target, and it just drives the right behavior.
I think on the incentives, my favorite one that is run is Dave's scratch card incentive. So can you talk us through that, how that works? I think it's a really easy one that people can just literally go and implement tomorrow.
Yeah. So I stole this off of my ex-boss when I used to do door-to-door sales. But one thing that's really, really cheap is and very easy to do is buy scratch cards. I do a thing where I go and buy loads of scratch cards. I put them in between our SDRs. So every SDR is facing another SDR. And if I want to have, similar to John, like a short-term burst in higher activity or more meetings booked because we're low, I put the scratch cards between each individual, or I pair them up, put them in between them, and I basically say, okay, whoever makes the most calls today, we will give the scratch card to. The key incentives is about how you sell it. So for me, with scratch cards, I pick whatever has the highest potential output. So you can make £1 million, and I will just talk about how if you do not make enough calls, you might not win £1 million, which obviously hasn't happened yet, but you never know.
The other thing as well, just to really touch on it, is do incentives that your team want. Ask them what one incentive for one person isn't going to be an incentive for another. So ask individual reps what they want, and you'll drive much better performance from that.
Usually we're really big on team incentives as well.
Yeah.
Where we don't make the compensation about the team, we will run loads of incentives to keep the team working together.
Okay, tech stack.
We had questions on this, so I wanted to get to it. This is the evolution of Cognizant's tech stack from H1 2018 to today. Today being, you can literally see every single tool we have in the sales tech stack. So, I mean, it should be there for you guys all to take away. I don't know if there's anything else you want to touch on in terms of any of the software.
Yeah, I think ones that have really kind of increased efficiency, SalesLoft, that's been really, really useful for the AEs, creating structured workflows or structured sequences that we can then input opportunities into. Reach Desk, direct mails making a comeback. That's a really powerful software that we've been able to use. And also Vidyard. The power of video is useful across the entirety of the funnel. And I think we could do an entire webinar based on that, really. But they're the key ones that are taken, or that I think are really powerful for the AEs.
It's probably worth mentioning Chili Piper. So that's what we use for round robin. We don't pair our SDRs and our AEs together. We actually have a round robin system, and that's what we use because it can evenly distribute the demos across the team. SalesScreen, a bit of a shout out to them as well. That's actually a gamification tool. To be honest with you, it's a bit of fun more than anything else.
It gets the vibes in the office.
100%. So every time a demo is booked, for example, it integrates with our Salesforce. The rep will push it to meeting booked, and then a song of their choice will play on a screen in the corner of the room. And I think that really helps us celebrate everything they're doing.
Yeah,
but
new
also
starters as well. I think that's really nice.
100%, and we also use it for whenever we run competitions. It will record all that data for us. So it's been a great addition to the stack.
Amazing. I'm really conscious of time, so we're probably going to skip the top tips. Hopefully, Dave and John have given you lots of tips throughout that you're able to take away and use for yourselves and your businesses. There's a list of useful resources. This webinar has been recorded and the slides will be sent to you as well afterwards, along with the recording, so you can listen back. And if you want to listen again, we're doing it later today as well at 6 p.m. UK time, I think. So I'm sure it will take a slightly different slant, but you're welcome to join us again. And I think that's kind of we've covered everything, and I hope you found it really useful. Thank you, and I hope you join us again.